Oh, you're hearing an echo from the window, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I heard it on the clap. It's okay.
Right on. All right, so welcome to the, well, I was going to say welcome to the middle of nowhere, but
I
that's
know,
a
I
different
almost
show.
said that too.
That's a different show.
the other
Welcome
show.
to Better Out Than In. My name is Lucas.
My name's Lee.
We're going to be talking about the deeper cuts of life, if you will.
Yeah, the truth is better out than in. That's what it's all about.
There's a lot of things that are better out than in.
It's true.
Burps and farts being one of them, yes.
Yes.
The subject we're trying to avoid, but I feel like the best thing to do is go right into it. So Lee was saying that there's a show called Better Out Than In, and it's like jokes about like
I didn't even listen to it, but the titles of the episodes suggest it's just about like
farts and burps.
like the science of it more, though. Maybe I don't know. It might be a good podcast. I didn't listen to it,
but I guess I'll just say because Better Out Than In is something that I started saying on Discord because my friends were burping and making sounds, and instead of reacting like, oh man, like could you stop that, you know what I mean, which is probably a better approach, I would say, hey man, better out than in. And I used to start, and I would always say, as I always say,
right?
better out than in. And that's the funny part, is that I never actually always said that. I just would say
But
that
then
I
you
always
did always say it.
I ended up always saying it over time.
Yeah.
Which became funny. But then the more I started thinking about better out than in, you know, the deeper, I think there is a deeper philosophy behind it, which is this idea of taking cliches and unpacking them. Because there's cliches, and why are they cliches? Because why do they stick around? Because they're true, and there's some truth to them. But understanding that truth is a little more difficult than just saying the cliche.
Yeah.
So the thing that has bugged me a lot in my life, I'll just finish this tangent just because we're kind of talking about it, and I feel like this is more like my philosophy, or what I would like to do with the show, is that, because I've been thinking about this a lot since our last talk, and I think that, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. Give me a moment here just to recollect, but
Unpacking cliches you're talking about.
yeah, the cliches that are true, why they stick around, because they are true. But the thing about the thing that has bugged me most in life is that when people have told me like cliches, like, you know, about like anger, you just get over it, right? Which is true, but what does it mean to just get over it, right? Or what does it mean to grieve something? You know what I mean? Like, what does it mean to when people say just let it go? Like, I don't actually think we let it go. I think we learn to hold on, and not to say that we hold a grudge, but we learn to carry.
Well, there's a whole other layer of how do you do that now?
But I guess the thing is that I'm challenging what people have said to me, because it's like, oh, just let it go. And then I'd be like, well, I don't think it is just let it go, because the more I try to let it go, it doesn't work. But then, you know, as I go through this experience, I end up back where I started, which is where the cliche kind of is. And I think the thing that's bugged me, what I'm trying to say, is that when people tell me the cliches, they're not telling me from that experience. They're telling me from we all know that this is something that's true.
Common, like, vernacular.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, well, for me, I guess I've become more sensitive to this feeling of knowing when someone's walked the walk when they talk about it.
Yeah, they speak from experience and wisdom, not just common sense type cliche, exactly.
Because when I hear the cliche without the feeling of them having experienced it, I just think then it's like you're just working through the cliche.
Or you've never worked through the cliche.
Well, you're working through it, just maybe not knowing that that's what you're fighting against. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so we were talking about, well, I guess that was kind of what I wanted to talk about describing kind of better out than in, this philosophy of like unpacking these cliches. It's better out than in. It's better to say what we like, you know, a burp is simple, but then why is it better to burp than not burp? And it's like, it is a funny joke, but I mean, it's almost this idea of like learning to be comfortable and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because in a burp, you know, you're not necessarily ready for a punch. You're burping. You know what I mean? You're not.
Yeah, I think you hit a key word there, which is vulnerability, and I think that's what I've been thinking about this a lot too. Because this is a very new idea. We just started talking about this idea like 2 weeks ago about even doing the show.
Yeah.
And then we had one test trial episode, which went pretty well. But yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot since then, and like, what is the podcast? And I'm starting to like tell a couple people about it, and I'm not like announcing it at all. I'm trying to like not announce it prematurely, but I'm just telling like people close to me that like this is kind of what I'm starting to do, and everyone's like really supportive. But the first question is always, what is it about, right? And I'm like, well, it's just kind of human conversations. Like, we're trying to get under the surface and bring the truth out, and it's like a philosophy podcast ultimately, and I like that.
It's funny because I hate philosophy, but I
love philosophy.
I think of what I'm interested most in is like psychology, philosophy. But what is better out than in mean to you? Because I mean that's kind of my journey through better out than in. And when I brought it up, you were like, "Man, that's perfect." But I think it was perfect for different reasons. So I'm curious, like, what is the goal of? I mean, for me, the goal is to unpack these things. I mean, because I think it's better out to be in that sense. But I know that, yeah. Just I guess, what is your reason for the show?
Well, I think life is all about stories, right? Everybody has a story, many stories, and we have story. And I think we both have a way of asking good questions and getting like deeper into people's stories than they may have even really thought themselves. So I'm really excited to start bringing guests on and just having them tell their story, and then we can ask good questions and get deep with them and maybe help them uncover something where they never thought of it that way. And it's like, it's better to get that out, and like that word vulnerability, giving people a channel to tell their story where they might never have done that publicly. And yeah, I think we're good hosts where we can really get the true story out of them. That's what it's really about for me. It's just it's a personal experience podcast. And the like human experience is so vast, and the only way to really understand it is to look at one person at a time and just get the truth out. The truth is better out than in.
So I've got a question for you.
Your story is better. It's better to let your story out than to hold it in yourself, because other people will take value from your experience, you know? Like if they're going through it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you, because before we were not streaming, but recording, you're asking like, what are we going to talk about? And it was like, yeah, we'll figure it out. We both had that.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't need to necessarily figure it out beforehand. You know, we would just go into it. But you're just telling me about like these like stories, unpacking these stories, and it just made me think about something that happened to me recently. So someone had messaged me like, how are you doing? Like we were having a back and forth or whatever, and then it ended with like, how are you doing? And I like really thought about it for a second. I was like, usually, you know, the answer is like when someone says like, how are you doing? All good,
man.
All good, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, really like, well, how am I doing though? So I really was like, how am I doing? Like try to take in an account for stuff.
Like give a real answer to the question.
At that moment, I was working actually. It was last night. I was working. And it was in between. I had like an hour break while I was waiting for more files to come in.
Okay.
And so as I was waiting there, I was looking at this message and I was thinking, I'm like, okay, well then I could say whatever, but let's not go into like whatever what I said, but I was just really trying to explore like, how am I doing? And this idea of like, you know, we have stories. I started to think of just how I was kind of this idea of like, oh, I'm fine or I'm good. But that's kind of not acknowledging the stories.
Yeah.
So
it's a bit of a cheap answer, isn't it?
I started thinking about, okay, well, I'm doing this like morning routine exercise, which has been really good and it's been consistent. I've been doing it for a couple months now. It's similar to like how I started cold showers last year. Like cold showers was the first thing that I've done the longest ever. But over time, once you start getting into a rhythm, you start to forget, I don't know, these little things that I'm trying to remind myself of, like, how am I doing, right? So I think I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing good, but why? So now I'm going to ask you, how are you doing, Lee? What's your story of this last week since we last talked to now?
I feel good. I feel, honestly...
And why do you feel good, though? What's making you feel good?
I have a new sense of purpose, which I think is a key element for anyone's life. And it's like letting go of what I thought my purpose was. It's been a journey in the last like 4 4 or 5 months of like really reassessing like what I want my life to be. And I'm starting to find those answers finally, and that feels really good. I just sort of like after the new year, I sort of realized like what I thought I wanted isn't true anymore. If it ever really was, like, I never dove in with my whole body. I just kind of like dipped my foot in and thought, this is cool, I could do this. But like, haven't fully committed enough where it's like, if I really wanted this, I would have it a long time ago. Probably. But maybe there's something else. And I've just been exploring for the last few months of like, maybe it's programming, maybe it's something else. And then, yeah, this idea came along. My friend actually, like, on the phone was saying it to me, like, you should do this. And then I kind of thought that was ridiculous. But then the more I chew on that idea, the more I thought, like, you know what, why not? Why can't that be true? So
Yeah.
now this is the first major step toward that, and it just feels good. There's like no resistance. And so, yeah, I have this renewed sense of purpose lately, and it feels awesome. So
Yeah.
that's how I'm doing.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, when I was thinking about how I was doing there, I thought it was easy to find the things that I was good at. I didn't want to obviously tell someone how you're not doing good, right? But I always find with the question, it's like, yeah, not comfortable.
I like it better like this.
Yeah, I didn't have those last time, but yeah, they are a little uncomfortable.
No, I just like, it's just, I feel better. We're in the chair now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but it was, so I started thinking about how I wasn't good though, right? Like the things that are bugging me. You know what I mean? And those used to, like, I guess those used to haunt me, and I guess they still do in a way. But I guess, what am I trying to say? I think, like, when we're talking about these stories, I think the things that are bugging us is where the stories are kind of interesting.
Yeah, because you overcome, like, getting to the other side of a barrier is like those moments that count. Like, if you're just coasting in a open road, like, that's a boring ass drive.
Yeah.
But if you're like, yo, we had to, you know, get around this, and we had to detour, and then we found, like, you know, and then that's a story now. And yeah, it comes out of challenges, for sure. That's where all the interesting things in life happen.
It's funny because I'm sensing a resistance in myself right now for some reason. I'm like, why did I bring up this topic? Why do I want to talk about how I'm not doing good? Why do I want to try and find that even now on this recording? I was like, man, I was about to say, like, I just want to stop. Can we restart? And I was like, starting to like laugh at myself. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what am I now avoiding, which is...
So how are you doing, Lucas?
I'm like, generally, I would say I'm doing good. Like, there's things and goals that I have been doing, but I feel like I need to do other things, like more work-wise. Like, I need to develop my freelancing job, like the things that I'm getting paid for. Like, yes, I might be able to just get by what I'm doing right now and survive, but like, I don't know. I was like, there's all these different ideas that I have, you know what I mean? Like, whether it be this idea of like coaching, because there's with Healthy Gamer, this guy that I've been telling you about, who has his own Twitch stream as well. He has like a coaching program, and I was like, man, I think I'd be a good coach. You know, one of the questions that is kind of the theme of the coaching is like, you know, where does burnout come from? And that's something I've thought a lot about. You know what I mean? Like, that's where this whole logical emotion thing has really come from these stresses that I've felt with burnout, which also extends to like threshold of action and all these things. But it's interesting. And now I'm like, okay, so how am I not doing good? I just realized how I was going to go off and explain all these other things. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I think it's just like I'm feeling a lot of stress with my career. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to, like, I don't necessarily want to just try to do what I've been doing, like just try to get more commercials or just try to get more podcasts. Like, I want to work on something that I want to work on, which takes reaching out to people, just sending emails.
Yeah,
you know?
Sales.
Like, a lot of the things that I've heard about, even streamers who are like you know, when after they've been streaming for a while and they're like, okay, I want to start taking it to the next level, it's like spending half a day just sending emails.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I was like, I
Gotta-
need to start thinking about that outreach and advertising myself. I guess right now that's a weird time for me, is like I'm learning a lot about confidence, but I'm also trying to advertise myself, which is a weird thing because confidence and advertising is something that I feel like is like a weird, selfish, narcissistic
Mm-hmm.
world, and that's something I've always avoided my whole life.
Me too.
But I think because of that, I've also suffered without having to really think about, I don't know, just the balance, you know what I mean? Because just this idea of the 5 personality traits, right? There's like these different traits. There's like, I can't remember them all. There's like openness, conscientiousness, narcissism.
I think
neuroticism.
neuroticism is what you're talking about.
Neuroticism, right? And all these are fluctuating throughout our lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we all have all of them. It's just which
Yeah.
one is more, what's the levels?
Like depression is highly associated with neuroticism because it's a lot of like, oh, I failed, I suck,
Overthinking.
Well, there's a lot
in
of
general.
I talk. You know what I mean? Why did I do this? Oh, I can't do this. Like, I'm an embarrassment, or like things like that.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
a failure. I should.
that is kind of narcissism. Well, like there's the.
Oh, it's neurotic. It's not necessarily, and that's
well,
why
neurotic
yeah.
neurotic is like where your brain's over.
But this is how we can
running
also.
on.
Well, that's how they use the 5 personality traits to kind of determine where maybe mentally you at, because maybe you're not usually this neurotic, but you've also maybe just had a breakup, or maybe you just got rejected or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or you're in a transition in your career and trying to figure it out. But yeah, I mean the sales thing, like promoting yourself and this whole idea of having to go and shop yourself around, it's always been uncomfortable for me too. And like it's not a narcissistic thing at all. It's like it's almost, without doing that, you're selling yourself short. And like that's where something I realized slowly about myself. It's like I got skills and talent. Like I'm pretty good at a lot of stuff, but I always know that there's 100 people that are way better than me at that, because I'll immerse myself in that world and see like how far it can go.
Yeah.
And always feel like I'm lesser than in every area, and then never push myself there. And then like until somebody's like, yo, you're not bad. And it's like, but then admitting that you're, well, how do you phrase this? Because like it's selling yourself short to just like, oh no, I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's like, no, don't sell yourself short. Like embrace like how good you are, whether, no, I'm not the best, but I'm this good, and for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And that's worth something. Instead of like, yeah, I've always sort of sold myself short and been like, well, no, I'm not good, because my idea of good was like the professionals I compare myself to, like the full time, this is all they do type people. And this is just like something I'm trying and I think I'm bad at it. But no, it's all a spectrum, and there's value in the whole spectrum. And so when it comes to sales, pushing yourself, selling yourself, it's like, yeah, reach out and say, this is how good I am. And the more you try, the more you get comfortable with that. And it's not a egotistical thing. It's just it's the truth.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like, I mean, in terms of just mixing world, like I've met other mixers that I think I'm like, you're definitely a better mixer than me. But I've also identified other things about them, like personality traits they're like very much more obsessed with audio. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm interested in audio, but I'm also interested in video, production, and how all the things come together. Like that kind of perspective.
Big picture.
Right, but it's and audio has been a way for me to like get into this industry and do something involving those things, which has been helpful.
Yeah.
But that's where I think maybe this is where this distress comes from, because I'm trying to figure out how does someone like me with like this kind of interest exist, trying to find the job title. But when I see the thing is, like, when I'm comparing with someone else who has like that obsession, I used to think, well, now I'm not as good of a mixer. I'll never be as good of a mixer because I don't have that same obsession. So
they're obsessed with, yeah.
But there's also
Exactly.
like a bias that starts to come, because I'll meet like other mixers and I'll start to see like a common trait. I'm like, oh, these 3 people, you know, out of like the 10 people that I've met have this kind of common trait. And I'm like, they're just mixers. You know what I mean? So I used to think that, oh, I'll never be like as good. So that's why I think I avoided doing all the freelance stuff.
Mm.
But then I started thinking about like, why am I a good, like what makes me good at doing mixing, not necessarily what makes a good mixer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because like your perspective has a big part of it. Like if you're good at making the talent comfortable, that's more than mixing, but
Yeah.
it's important in the session. I mean, I guess the director, whatever, depends what kind of situation you're in, but there's all kinds of angles to this and all kinds of skills apply.
The skills is another thing too, right? Because the thing I think I identified was like I like producing,
Mm-hmm.
because I like talking with people and finding something that you're trying to find too, and then we can maybe find it together, whether it's through a project in music, whether it's through conversation, and not even in nursing. That's where I learned it actually, was like even in nursing, it's like you were coming in with a problem, okay, now let's talk and find out the solution. But we're gonna have to go through all this inquiry and kind of investigate,
Mm-hmm.
and then work together, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Which is what producing is working together.
And what's interesting about that is that so often you'll ask somebody like, what's the problem? And they'll tell you some cheap answer and you're like, no, but what's really the problem?
Right.
And that's the more interesting question to me. It's like, okay, you think that you're nervous because whatever, I don't know, now I'm just thinking of arbitrary examples and it's useless, but that's kind of
not
what I'm
useless.
excited about this podcast for, is like we bring people on and say like, how you doing? And we get a cheap, all good answer, but then we're going to say, yeah, but really though? And we're going to get under the layers and we're going to reveal things about people that they never even knew. I'm excited, man, because I obsess over that. Like, I deeply analyze myself in ways that I don't think many people do.
Yeah.
And I only know that because, like, when I tell people about it, they're like, this is what you think about all day? And I'm like, is it just me? Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, I do. I think about these like psychological, I really try to analyze myself deeply and like from outside perspectives and like figure out what's actually wrong and like what's my version of what's wrong and what's actually wrong, if anything.
How do you do that? What's your process of analysis, would you say? Or maybe think of an example and maybe we can walk through one, if you don't mind.
I'm not gonna be able to think of a specific example now, but like I just think about it a lot and I try to see, I think I have a strong sense of empathy and I'm able to recognize like another person's angle on everything. So I guess like I talk out loud to myself as if I'm telling my story to someone else, and there's usually a specific person in my head where it's like, if I was going to explain this to like my mom, or if I was going to explain it to like my friend, or like this girl that I'm just starting to see, and like if I wanted her to get to know me, like how would I explain these little things? And I'll just talk about like myself to them.
Yeah.
And then I'll like come to realizations and I'll be like, oh wait, because like when I try to put it into a sentence, it like doesn't make sense anymore. And then I'll have like a new question will come up and I'll be like, what does that even mean? And then I'll start thinking about that more.
Yeah.
And I don't know any like, I can't think of this because this is just every day. Like
Yeah.
when I'm alone and I'm stoned and I'm just like pacing my apartment, like talking out loud to nobody.
Well, that's what we're doing here.
But I
is-
make breakthroughs from that.
what
I
we're-
really
what-
do.
That's what we're doing here is the same thing, but now
sure.
instead of having imagined someone, now you're having someone else, and it's, I mean, the conversation goes where it goes.
Exactly.
But I was curious, have you ever recorded yourself when
No.
you've talked out loud
No,
and then listened to that?
never.
Um,
I've thought about it, but I never did it. Because like by the time I think about that, I'm like, I'm already done now. Like the moments just happen.
Yeah.
So that's why I love this. We're going to deliberately initiate those moments. I hope. I think it will.
Yeah.
With enough time, it will happen.
Yeah. Well, the question is, when you talked about getting to the deeper layer, like when someone says, hey, I'm good, but then you're like, well, what's really good?
Yeah.
The question is like, how do you get to the deeper layer? with
Yeah.
someone?
that's just like an improvised thing. Like you just sense the energy, and there's a lot of body language involved, and there's a lot of like, well, I know you maybe from years past, and I know a bit of your story, and I'm like kind of like, I don't believe you when you say you're all good, because I'm like, well, what about this situation? And with strangers it's different, but like I like people like your Tony Robbins and that kind of people, and when I hear them like talk to somebody, and it's like it's just about asking the right questions at the right time, where people like when you played the why game with me, and it's just like everything I had explained is just like, yeah, but why?
Yeah.
And then like it forces you to think deeper about like, okay, well, where did that problem come from? And it's like, well, why can't you deal with that? Oh, well, where did that problem come from? And then you start looking all the way back. It's like, oh, well, when I was 8 years old, like all my friends stopped talking to me
Yeah.
for like 6 months. It felt like forever, and like no one signed my yearbook or anything, and like now I'm still traumatized from that, and it's manifesting in ways where I thought I had a problem, but then it's like, oh, it's just like a childhood trauma this whole time.
Do you want to try it?
Sure.
Do you want to try it with me? You can try the why game with me first. We'll
Why,
see where
though?
we go. I'm talking about with the like the freelance and the thing that's distressing me.
Why do you want to talk about that?
I want to talk about it because it's distressing me.
Why is it distressing you?
This is a good why game thing.
We're already playing, bro.
Yeah, I know. I know. But that's like the thing is to consider them. You know what I mean? Well,
Yeah, so why is it distressing you?
it's distressing me because I feel like I can do more.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like I can do more
Why do you feel like you need to do more?
because I feel like because I can, and that's my duty. If I can do more, then I should do more.
So what's missing?
I mean, I would say off the bat discipline, but I've been learning a lot about discipline. So I wouldn't say it's discipline that's missing. I feel like I don't know, it's more, I guess, specific discipline. And it's like I need a more accurate discipline for specific things, like more I don't know how to say it. It's like I'm disciplined in certain areas. I'm motivated in certain areas, especially like the physical stuff. I think that's because I started in a certain way and I had a certain approach, a certain goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what I'm lacking is goal, like a plan. Like I know I have skills and I'm developing them
Mm-hmm.
and I have dreams, but I don't have necessarily things connecting them. And I've always felt like my whole life I had to make these connections. And then now I've got to learn to a point where I'm like, well, I can't just make connections and then that's how you get there. It's like I find that to get there is not always necessarily the way you plan. So I was like, I kind of gave up on necessarily needing to plan things. I'm like, well, I have these skills, get these skills deployed. So I'm getting the skills deployed. But I'm like, but I'm still not I'm just getting the skills deployed. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
The skills, I'm not necessarily feel like I'm pushing myself to do. Like I made a business,
Mm-hmm.
and the business is operational, but it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily have like a mission for growth. It just has like a mission to sustain, and that's like not necessarily a bad thing, but I think too much of that for too long is a bad thing.
Yeah, so you said you want more, but is it more quantity or more quality of the work? Like maybe you don't need to do more work, but find work that means more
Yeah, I guess
with your skills.
I feel like what means more too has been the jobs that I go out and I establish connections with.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's just getting over that just to be able to, I mean, writing is a big thing that causes me huge anxiety, like typing and like trying to write something.
Like emails and stuff too, or more scripts?
I mean, I would say with everything, like I think because with emails it's a little easier because I can think about like something in nursing that has helped a lot with my written communication is I think of this, it's called SBAR, SBAR. It's a system of like, it's an acronym for situation, background, assessment, and then what's R?
Result?
Assessment, and then it's like the idea of like the plan, basically like the assessment and then the Like what was done. I'm trying to think of what the R stands for.
Report?
Not, well, it's something to that degree. Oh, man. Situation, background, assessment, recommendation.
Recommendation. There we go. Okay.
Right? So when you're working on a team, like with nursing, you're working with physicians, and it's like, okay, this is the situation, and you know the patient well, so then you give the brief background. That's the most important information. And then the assessment, which is like, now with all that information, this was the current results. And then my recommendation would be like maybe this medication, because this is what you've put them on before, but we need to do an order every time.
And then the doctor would take that, read it, either agree or not with the recommendation, and move forward.
Well, this is mostly in verbal communication.
I see. Okay.
So it's like a system that a way to think like that. So you can categorize your conversation and you can deliver the information in a way.
Get to the point.
Yeah.
You don't get into storytelling. And
so with emails in production, I always think of that. I'm like, okay, whenever I'm reaching out to someone, I'm like, okay, what's the situation in like the first sentence? And then the background is like, so now that maybe the excuses are like the extra, not maybe excuses is a bad word, but the extra information.
Yeah.
And then the assessment is like, so now this is what I'm going to do about it. And then last is like, do you agree or do you not agree? What are your thoughts, kind of thing? You know?
Yeah, it's just like a straight to the point template for communicating something. I like it.
Exactly.
That's my style, is very to the point. Like I get so annoyed when people like tell long-winded stories to like beat around the bush and sometimes even forget what the whole point was. I'm just like, get there faster. Yeah. I get so annoyed.
Why do you get annoyed?
Because I just want the information. I don't care about the story a lot of times. Well, like, I mean...
Why do you not care about the story, but why do you need the information?
Well, it's just like how my brain works is like I want the details fast, but then I feel like I come across like unemotional sometimes because when I deliver information that way, it can come off cold. So like the important part is knowing that everybody has a different style, and like I've put a lot of effort into adapting my style to the person. So maybe it's like an old lady and she just wants to chat for a bit, and so it doesn't matter. There's no like whatever. Or like, I don't know, I had an ex who just like would talk circles around nothing, and then I'd be like, what's the point of all this? And I'd be looking for the point, and then eventually realize there's no point to any of this, is there?
Why does there need to be a point?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, then I'm maturing to realize that like there doesn't always have to be a point.
Why doesn't there always need to be a point?
And maybe these were like, I'm just remembering just like random emotional.
Why doesn't there always need to be a point?
Because life is more than that. I don't know.
Why is life more than that?
I don't know, man. I don't know, man.
No, well, think about it.
Well, like...
Don't answer it right away. Just think about it. I mean, the I don't know is the best. That's where you're on the cusp of knowing something. You're about to learn.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so this uncomfortableness is because learning sucks. You know what I mean?
It's painful. Change is painful.
There's an aspect to learning that's painful, right? Especially when it's something that we really want to get better at too.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like the question is like, why is the why game work? Well, because it forces, like, it's just easy for the person asking the why.
Yeah.
Still think about your answer though.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you some time to think about it, you know?
No, I am. So like...
Why doesn't there need to be a point always?
Well,
sometimes there needs to be, but why not always?
Well, because it's just about emotional bonding at that point. Like, yeah, sometimes you're just having fun and you're just telling jokes, and it's just the laughter is the point, and like the fun is the point. Or like with the example of my ex who would just talk circles, like she just wants to talk and just wants to bond, and like I'm probably remembering like sort of stressful situations where I need information, and it's like I need the information now, like we're driving or something, or like we're trying to make a plan, and that's ultimately my problem.
I just want to hold up for a sec, because you were saying you've got to a point where you're like, life, it doesn't always need to have a point. But then you went to describe how, well, maybe there was these other points. Like maybe the point was bonding, or maybe the point was for the fun of it, or the laugh in the moment.
Well, when I said there doesn't always have to be a point, I mean like there's not always information to process, where like I'm looking for numbers and like
Right.
data. I'm looking for data, and like I guess that's what I meant. Like there's not always data to process. Like sometimes it's just.
So why isn't laughter for the fun of it data?
I guess it is I guess it is like
Not
in
for
a broad
me.
sense.
I'm just saying for you. Why isn't it? Why do you think it's not for you? Like why is that not the point?
It wasn't the point that I was looking for at the time.
Right.
Where so it is important though. I think it's the most important actually, like just laughing and enjoying each other.
But
company.
wait, I think it's what you're saying. What's important is I want to be clear though, because we're talking about specific things, but it sounds like what's important is there's a point to the things that we might not be looking to find.
Right.
Whether it be laughing, whether it be this or that, whether it be a situation, it's just like when we're looking for specific kind of information, and it's like, why aren't they getting to the point? It's like over time you're like now you're reflecting and going, well, there always was a point, it just wasn't the points that I wanted to look at, but there were points, but now and you see them, so it's like there aren't really circumstances where there isn't a point.
It's true, yeah.
So when you're to your thing of saying when your original belief is like, like you questioned it and said, well, in life there's just things that there is no point for. And that's the thing I wanted to kind of go back to and kind of maybe explore, which is like, maybe that's wrong. Maybe there is a point to everything. It's just our willingness to see it or find it or whatever. And not to say any judgment, right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe those aren't important things. Maybe they are important things.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that, through that experience of like, I don't know. It sounds like you've unpacked it to even recognize that there was other things. Like we didn't have to necessarily talk about how laughing and those things could be a point. It's like for me, I'm agreeing with you that like I'm in for the information and for like a punchline.
Yeah.
So if like you're going to kind of bring this around, I'm willing to listen to the details. But if we're not coming back to it, then why do we even stop there?
Yeah. Like, why are these relevant?
You know what I mean?
Details. Yeah.
And then I'm just thinking, oh, is it just like, is this just you just need someone just to like talk to, and you're not actually looking for my opinion? You're just like, I'm like an NPC. And then I maybe get offended, but then I'm starting to think like, well, why am I getting suddenly offended in this moment? It's like, well, what's the point that I'm missing? And then I would oftentimes go like, well, just relax. There's oftentimes no point to anything. Right?
But the point is that they need to let it out, or
well, the thing is,
it's different in every situation. Obviously,
I think the thing is that we're saying confirming is that we just don't know.
We just don't know.
When we're in the moment and we don't know what's happening, there's a point happening and we just don't know. That's the thing that's common, whether it's good or bad.
And it's okay not to know. And like being comfortable with not knowing, it's like, okay, well, I don't know yet, so let's just keep an eye out for the answer to that. Yeah. And that's like what meditation practice is like essential for, is being able to zoom out of your own thoughts and realize like, and be able to analyze the situation while it's happening.
I think you zoom in. I think you get more focused. I think you get, because focus to me, when they're focusing on a camera is like one thing, but I think this idea of focusing is like we're holding a bunch of objects, like one on your foot, one both in your hands. I want to focus on this. I'm going to have to put down my phone, put down my leg, and then I can just I have only one thing I'm holding on to.
Mm-hmm.
So why did I bring that up? Like when with meditation.
Well, you're saying zooming in.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, because you can't, like sometimes with meditation, it's like you can't avoid it. Sometimes when you start to meditate, you're like, I need to kind of calm down. It's like you just feel overwhelmed. So I think what's happening is like you're learning to sit with it. Like why did we get on this whole why thing, and why did we stop specifically at this point when you're talking about the point? I thought that was interesting, because I think this is how we get to those deeper layers, is by finding the things that we convince ourselves otherwise, though they're from these kind of disruptions.
What we thought were obvious, it's not so obvious
Yeah.
if you start to unpack it.
But I did find it funny how you stopped asking me why questions, and then I was like, because I realized I was explaining other things, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna flip it on him, and now I'm gonna start asking him why questions. And then before you knew it, you were like, wait, how did we fucking get here, man?
Yeah, I'm supposed to ask the questions. I'm supposed to be in the easy seat.
When you were like, I don't know, man. You're like, I don't know. That's when I knew. I was like, that's when he realized I just.
I know, you got me. You put me in in the hot seat. But this is what it's all about. The hot seat makes you stronger, you know.
Well, what's interesting too is like the willingness to do it, right? Like when we brought up the Y game, I was like, "Do you want to do it for me first?" And I
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily thinking, "Oh, I'm going to swap it on him."
No, of course.
It was just in the moment. It was almost like this is like I think of communication like martial arts. It's a combat, but it's not necessarily like violent, right? But you know, I was like, I'm gonna just go into this moment of like, okay, I'm gonna play defensive, and you can just hit me with the Ys, and it's gonna open up some areas, right? But then there was a moment where I'm like, okay, I'm willing to kind of find them, but then I was like, oh, now he stopped asking me whys, and then I was like, oh, he's not gonna know.
Well,
but because we're just in the action,
I was still asking questions, though.
you know what I mean? Because
I
we're
thought I
still
had
in the
some good
action,
questions.
it was almost like unseemly. Sorry, that's my foot.
Gotcha. Oh, man.
Yeah, the Y game though, man.
I love the martial arts analogy, though, because, like, it reminds me of that Bruce Lee scene.
Oh.
I think it's from Enter the Dragon, where he's telling the student to kick him, or he's like, hit me. And then he's like, and then he says, we need emotional content. He's like, don't just pussy hit me. He needs them. And then so the student gets angry and he like attacks him. He's like, am I your enemy?
Yeah.
Like, I'm your opponent, but I'm not your enemy. Like, I'm your teacher. So it's like, hit me with emotional content that's relevant to now. I'm not your enemy. Don't hit me like I'm your enemy. Hit me like I'm your opponent. I'm your teacher. And there's a very different, your opponent's not always your enemy, but like, we're always dealing with opponents. There's always somebody opposite us. Opponent is opposite. It's whoever's opposite you in the situation. That's where the word opponent comes from. So like, opponent doesn't mean enemy, but I think when like through sports and games and stuff, those words have sort of merged and they're not synonymous.
Right.
And that's really important distinction. So when you're talking about communication as like a martial art, it is an art and you do have an opponent, but it's not always a debate, you know.
Yeah.
It's a discussion or conversation, and it's bouncing off your opponent with emotional content.
Yeah, I think of like Art of War, like knowing your opponent, you know, type of thing. Like knowing if they are coming at you to fight, like to fight you, like,
Right.
and maybe they don't even realize that it's like you're coming at it with cutting words. And I think most oftentimes it's family that does that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's unknowing, you know what I mean? And then it's like to be able to recognize that and know what environment you're in, know what kind of opponent you're against. Like you and I can play this Y game, but that might not be the best for, you know, maybe me with my like siblings or something like that. Because
Right.
there's a certain level of trust, especially with it. This is like sparring. You know what I mean? For the moments that when we are in like a stressful situation and the Y game is pretty much happening and someone asks just like, how are you doing? And you're like, why are they asking that? Why am I not be able to answer? Like, interesting. Why can't I just say I'm good? Like, why? What's going on? And then to go through that process, I think that's my analysis process. I catch myself going like, oh, and then
Why is it harder with siblings
well, siblings just in general, from my
or
understanding.
family in general?
Well, it's something that Healthy Gamer said, actually, Dr. K. And he said, like, with family, they're more, boundaries are more,
Loose?
yeah, or just, like, trespassed.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Because like, we're family, we'll get past it. Like,
Yeah.
you say harsh things.
Exactly. Or knowing something like, hey, like, something that maybe you're really embarrassed about.
And then bringing that up when...
In a way for, like, something malicious. Like, because, like,
Yeah.
maybe they already have felt attacked by you. You know, most of the
And then
time...
they're like, okay, well, I'm going to play the big card now and just end this conversation right here.
I would say almost all family arguments that I've experienced has started, or at least something involved of like someone saying something not thinking it was an attack, but something that has been said over a long period of time, and like, yeah, I just brush it off, and then and it does bug me though. So that's me giving up my boundaries.
Right.
But then there's
Yeah.
the one day where then I
Compromising.
snap and I'm like, you can't go, and then I say something back. So then now the attack is on. Right. So for them, it's kind of like I can recognize how it's unfair, because it's like, well, up until now, that has never been a boundary, and now you just
Right.
suddenly snap.
Yeah.
So it's like that's been building.
But it's
up.
always been a boundary. You just weren't assertive about it.
So that's where family, you can learn, like, oh, like you're like, that's what I've learned with my family, is like my contribution to the whole thing. Like just this idea that I have of like this theme in my head when I think about my childhood was like, it was always like catch up, Lucas, you're behind.
You're a
'Cause I'm
lot
the youngest.
younger, a lot younger too.
Yeah,
Significantly younger.
It was always like whenever I got to like start playing some game, everyone's done with it. You know, that's not the cool thing to do anymore.
Right.
And stuff like that. So I always felt it was like catch up, you're always behind. Like we don't care about your opinion. But that was also something I think about. I'm like, well, what part of that have I put that on myself too? Because it wasn't always like that. And I'm sure there was some of it like that, because how could it not be? Like older siblings to a younger sibling. Of course, there's going to be things that like, yeah, that's the children do. We're older. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a pride to getting older every year. So it's like, it's not malicious, but it's interesting how I started interpreting.
Yeah, I think I relate to that big time because I'm the youngest in my family too. With all my cousins are older too. Like I'm the youngest of my generation until my sister started having kids and my cousins had kids and stuff, and then it starts to change. But definitely relate to the idea of like, yeah, like by the time I got to high school, everyone was in college already, and like by the time I got to college, everyone had jobs already, and
Right.
like it's like I'm always a step behind, and just always felt like what I'm going through is lesser than what they're going through, even though you go through the same things.
Yeah.
But it's like it's just like been there, done that with the family now, and it's like I always felt like I belonged at the kids' table, so to speak. Until finally you realize, like, wait, I'm pushing 30. Like I'm not like it's not the case. Yeah, my family never has like arguments anymore though, or at least when they do, I tend to stay out of them. I tend to just be kind of like wait for it to blow over, because
Yeah.
I have like a very passive personality when it comes to that, at least in those scenarios. There's me and my one sister are very passive in that sort of way, and then my other two sisters are more assertive personalities, so that they tend to like bicker, even though I don't think it's really, no one wants to hurt each other, but they both just like want to be right or want to be heard the loudest somehow. I don't know how to say it, but it's like sometimes like voices get raised, and then it's like, what the hell even just happened? I'm just gonna stand over here until it blows over. And I haven't been caught in that moment where I'm challenged. Although maybe that is the challenge, is like when those things happen, I can speak up and use my experience with Buddhism and meditation to be like, what are we even fighting about, guys? Like maybe I can start
Well, I
to
think
assert myself more.
there's no analysis that can prepare you for the challenge other than truth and honesty. And I think how truth and honesty prepares you for that challenge is like to understand, like for me, what started happening with me with my arguments with my siblings is like halfway through the argument, I would realize like my contribution. I realized like, oh, now I understand, because I would through conversation understand like what I've said now that has gone across the line for them. Right? And then like halfway through, I'd be like, okay, now I'm sorry. Like I genuinely, like now I'm sorry. I actually understand now. And more often than not, it was like, it would drive them even more crazy, because it's like now they almost wouldn't believe me. They're like, no way you're sorry. Like, I'm genuinely sorry. And then I would explain what I'm sorry about and reiterate the whole thing. And they'd be like, just like even more angry. And then I realized, I'm like, I need to let them still be angry. Right? And that's maybe on them. Maybe this is wrong, but like I've also recognized what's happening in the situation, right?
Yeah.
And then what started happening is like I started realizing that these things can be recognized even earlier in the conversation. And even on Discord, I've kind of noticed this thing, and I'm trying to get better at noticing it as quick as I can, so that like when someone says something, like the best reaction, if I, instead of like going already to like aggressive mode or like being offended, just to even ask, hey, did you mean to offend me? Right? And whether they lie to you and say, no, I didn't mean to, that's going to come back on them, because the next time they try to offend you, you'll be like, hey, did you try to offend me? And it's going to make them even more crazy, because it's like, why don't they get it? I'm trying to offend them. And basically they get to a point, they're like, yes, I'm trying to offend you. And then you're like, well, why?
Right.
And then it's
I thought
like,
we were
now it's
friends.
on them. But
Yeah.
the thing is, so it's regardless of how other people answer. But the thing is, if you can recognize that you're suddenly becoming defensive, is to then not necessarily react on that, but react to yourself and go, why am I defensive? And then maybe ask them, hey, are you trying? And they'll be like, oh, no, I'm not actually trying to offend you. And then you're like, oh, I can let my guard down. This isn't a
Well, now we're
combat.
getting into the subtleties of like reacting versus responding. And like when you react impulsively, emotionally, instinctively, it's not in control. It's a reaction that just happens. But like what you're describing is more of a mature, like thought out response to a situation where you can like respond with like, oh, now I'm actually sorry. And like you're not just trying to win the argument. It's like responding to the situation and not just reacting to the feelings.
Well, it's I'm tracing the core down. Like emotional logic for me is to go through the signal chain and find where the issue is.
Yeah.
So when I would have an argument, it was in retrospect that I'd be like, oh, all these other emotions were going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd like recognize how I was wrong, and then started getting into more arguments, and then I was able to like process it in the argument. You know what I mean? And then also understand that people also need to kind of, they're not processing it yet either. And you kind of need to give them the time to do that,
Yeah.
regardless of where you're at. But then
Yeah, it'll come.
I just started getting closer and closer to like, where is this moment? And that's why I started thinking the threshold of action. Like, where is this instantaneous moment? And like with Bruce Lee, or at least like what I'm understanding of like martial arts when it was originally taught with meditation, was like, we're going to do this action very slowly so that when you do need to punch, only the muscles that are required to punch are going to punch. And so I kind of think of it as like delay or lag time, like on a computer. You're going to calculate this move, boom, you can punch.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm thinking of it like this emotion, this impulse is where I'm like at right now. And so I've been thinking a lot about when I get an idea to do something, it's like, don't do it right away. I get an idea, oh, I got to do this. I'm like, now I got to write it down. I have to plan to do this.
Yeah.
So to train the impulse, like started with the push-ups. I'm going to do 10 and recognize that there's a part of me that's like, we could just do more. It's like, no. That's what I need. Discipline isn't actually starting things. Discipline is stopping. Even
It's
when you
both, yeah, like yeah.
when you think of discipline of like, you know, like a parent to a kid, they're stopping the action. So discipline, I've recognized now, is more about stopping things with control.
Right. Well, yeah, because like even starting something good like push-ups, you have to stop not doing push-ups.
So the opposite of discipline now is impulse for me. And now I've recognized how there's all these other things that I do impulsively, just random thoughts, like meditation. I've thought about that too, because you're sitting there and a thought comes in. That's an impulse.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you stop to recognize the thought is because you're sitting there to meditate. But then you go back to your daily life. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to do this, going to do that. And so I started doing that with the push-ups, started doing that with streaming. Like if I get an idea, it's like, I'm not going to sit down and edit as soon as I feel like I can edit. It's like, no, I'm going to plan.
Add that to the list, and when it's editing time, you know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the idea of like, it's not about starting something, but it's about stopping something else. So it's like even like waking up, you have to stop sleeping. And waking up isn't an action in itself. Like it requires that you stop sleeping, and then waking up automatically happens.
Yeah.
And like if you stop loafing, then you're gonna be more active like automatically, because like it's the opposite reaction.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I'm gonna
So-
start thinking about that more.
Now I'm thinking about just like the cliches of like, you know, the power of your mind and things like that. But then there's really powerful thoughts of like, the mind isn't your friend. And recognizing that your mind's contribution to something, and even just that idea alone of waking up, it's like, to even say at first to someone who's never thought about their decision when they wake up,
Yeah.
it's like you have to bring first awareness. Awareness is the beginning of change. Once you see it, then you can start thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then this is where my idea of like emotional logic comes in, or logical motions, that you're going to trace this chord down and keep playing this why game essentially, and then kind of get right back to where you started of like, well, the mind is like, you know what I mean, is my friend, and it isn't. It actually, it's funny how it's both. And
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing too. It's like recognizing that your brain is separate from your mind, even.
oh
Like,
yeah, we haven't really clarified that either, but yeah, I guess.
And then there's like you as an observer of all that, but like your brain is just like another. It's like you don't identify with your leg necessarily, but like your leg is a part of you that you can look at. But you can't look at your brain thinking, but you kind of can
I think
if you
we
practice. That's what meditation shows us. That's what meditation is. It's like the practice of observing our brain as if it was any other muscle in our body and training it. And yeah, it's exactly what you were just saying with where you can analyze your brain, and your brain isn't on your side. Your brain just is, like your leg isn't on your side either unless you train it. Like
Yeah.
if you don't, then it's going to be a hindrance.
So I'm thinking though, like why, like I think we can identify with our body. I think we do. I think even when we are in our deepest meditation, I think like that's what's interesting for me about doing meditation is like I think I was always very a mental person. I think you were too. And I think what's interesting now in my life is that I'm more focused on the physical. Not that I'm now disregarding the mental, but I'm now starting to appreciate more of the feeling of the physical, and even just where I begin and where I end. You know what I mean? And that I can even feel, you know what I mean, as like when we did that meditation practice and like tracing it back to this spot. You know what I mean? Like that's, you get there by feeling more. But though I'm describing to you a spot where there is no nerves, there's no feeling here. And so you get there do a different way. So I think, for some people who are more in the physical, meditation then brings them to those spiritual ideas of this analysis. But now I think like more about how my analysis has hindered me a lot, because it's kind of hard to play the why. I mean, I think you learn to play the why game with other people, and people then ask you, I don't know. It's like, it's hard to get stuck on your own is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because why would you try to get yourself stuck?
I do challenge myself to like get stuck, and that's when I'm walking around my house talking out loud. It's like I get to a point where it's like, where I'll describe like an argument. I'll be trying to like get to the bottom of an argument I had with somebody, and then like end up realizing like it was my fault the whole time, or like there's a problem in me that I need to work on so that I can prevent those arguments later.
It's always both. I have to cut you off because it is always both. I think recognizing your contribution is one thing.
But I don't have much power over changing them, especially when the argument already happened.
Exactly.
It's like I'm trying to just learn something from it.
That's all you're
that's
responsible
deeper.
for, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah, there's always two sides to the coin, but well, there's three sides to the coin, right?
Perhaps. Perhaps.
My side, your side, and the truth.
Well, yeah, I would say God's side, but yeah.
But no, I think that there's always, because I really believe that everything that we experience is a reflection of our own experience, right? Like whether it's external, like you could say something to me, but it's my experience that I heard it. And even the words that you say, they're translated so many times between your brain and my brain. Like the words you say, like the language that comes to your mouth, and then I have to hear those words, compare that to what those words have meant before, and then translate that into context, and then I receive a message.
Yeah.
And me receiving that message is the entire experience. So like it's all personal. Like,
yeah, when people talk, I am hearing you speak, and then I'm hearing something repeat what you are saying as you're saying it in my head.
Yeah, like you have to translate everything into your own memory language, so to speak. And that's like, that means that everything that happens is deeply personal. So like if I get in a fight with somebody, that's where my thought process is. It's like, what is this telling me about my experience that needs to change when there's a problem? And yeah, it's often when I'm like, something that annoys me about somebody, like did we record the conversation before where I was talking about the girl with the big words?
I think we did. Did we? I remember the conversation.
I don't remember if we recorded it or not, but I'll just sum it up quick. So there was a girl at summer camp who like I thought she used too many big words.
Yeah.
And then I ended up years later realizing that like I tried so hard not to use big words and like not to come off smart because of like the crowd that I was trying to look cool for.
Yeah.
I thought it was cool to not use big words. And so her using so many big words, I thought was like, came off pretend, but then it was like, it ends up all being an internal problem.
Sorry.
Is that the timer?
Yeah.
Okay, good time. But yeah, I mean, that's maybe a good place to wrap up, is like just leaving on the thought that like everything that we experience is a personal experience.
Well, I know you. I remember that story, and like you did the why game with that. Excuse me, with
Basically,
that
yeah.
story.
Yeah.
You know, to ask yourself, well, why is it not cool to use big words, and how do you feel now? Do you use big words?
I use the appropriate word. I'm very conscious of the words that I'm using, especially when in writing.
Yeah.
I'm like in text messages and stuff. Like I hate like, I mean, I use them sometimes, but I hate texting with just no punctuation and no
Right.
capital letters or anything like that. Like I'm very like, I
That's
use
funny.
commas and semicolons and like whatever is I want to make sure that the message being received is the message that I intended to send.
Yeah.
And I actually got that from you in our Grayson days. Like you taught me that first.
Yeah.
It's like, it's about the message being received is more important than me just blah.
But I always found it didn't matter because they would always almost not even read it.
But I put intention into that, even with text messages and stuff. Like I'll use commas and periods, and like
Yeah.
I love when I get a chance to put a semicolon in there. Like I get off on that, but
Yeah, I think it matters because you try, right? You try to express yourself as best
Yeah.
as you can.
yeah, and whether the word is big or not, like if this is what, and so now I'm like actually a little almost obsessed with like, what does the word actually mean? And like when we just like break down the word opponent, like opponent is opposite, the one opposite you in the situation. Like
Yeah.
I'm really interested in linguistics now because like I want to use the appropriate word for what I'm trying to say. And there's a lot of words to choose from.
I was just thinking now, we should have moved the mic, I think, a little more in front of you. Now that we're at the end.
Well, I've been slouching and unslouching and I've been adjusting it a bit, but yeah, this isn't going to be the mic of choice anyway.
Well, I do have a question to move towards wrapping up, but I have a question. It's like, when do you know it's appropriate to use a big word? Because you said there's an appropriate time and place, but when do you know that? When does that intuition come?
It doesn't matter how big the word is. That's the point. Like it doesn't matter. Sometimes a small word works and sometimes a big word works.
Yeah, but is a big word appropriate when it comes to you? Or is a big word worth when you have to, you're like, ooh, I don't know a big word for this, but let me think about it.
No, I don't go out of my way to use big words. Like it's not the size of the word, it's the meaning of the word.
Yeah.
That's more important.
So, but there's a sophistication
Yeah.
that you're referring to.
Yeah, I guess if you're
So
trying to be formal and
when is it appropriate? Because this is why I'm just trying to ask you specifically, because you were like, now how I feel about the big words thing in context with this girl who used big words at camp.
yeah.
Your relationship with using big words is like, I now using them appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm asking, when is it appropriate? So however you mean big words in that context,
Right.
when now, how do you know when it's appropriate?
I'm trying to really blur that line even because even like
Well, when's the last time you used a big word? Let me start with that.
I don't know. Because I don't care anymore if the word's big. Like, I don't care. I guess it's like, okay, there's obvious lines where it's like, this is a formal email and I'm emailing my boss and I work in a corporation. So I'm not going to say like, yo, what's up?
Yeah.
In that email. It's going to be like salutation. I'm not going to say salutations either.
Salutations is awesome, but I wouldn't say it in email, but it is awesome.
It's a good
old
word.
school. Yeah.
It's a good word. But no, like, there's formalities, I guess, but then like even with my friends, like my skater friends, I'm not gonna dumb down what I'm saying anymore. I think that's what I realized the problem was, is that I was actively dumbing myself down.
Yeah, okay.
And that is the problem. And the reason that she bothered me was because she wasn't.
Yeah.
And I was. And then so it's like, that ended up being, why do I dumb myself down for anybody? It's not that I'm reaching to try and sound as smart as possible,
Yeah.
but it's like, I'm gonna say the word that I'm thinking now, and I was actually double analyzing and saying that's too big of a word, I'm gonna dumb it down.
Yeah.
And so I've stopped doing that.
So when's the last time that's happened?
I can't remember. I don't know.
Well, it's happened at some point.
But there's no, I don't.
Well, it's happened at camp.
That was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago.
So then I'm trying to think of like, have you come up?
And it was way later that I even thought, but it's something that I just always remember. It like that's just like the reference that comes back to me every time I think of big words, and like
Yeah.
I just remember that, and that's just like a little trigger in my mind to remember, like, dude, chill.
Well, what I think is significant about it, regardless of whatever question I ask, in the main point that I'm seeing is that you're proud of it,
Yeah.
right? Which is
I
like
think that
maybe,
was growth.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's important to find things that we're proud about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not in a prideful, egotistical way, but it's like that's something that would be oftentimes, I think, brushed under the carpet. Of like, why would I be proud that I'm not afraid to speak, like not to dumb down my words anymore? But as you said moments ago, this is a very personal experience. Just as we are hearing things, that emotion is a personal experience.
Yeah.
So I can relate to you on if we can talk about that emotion, we can maybe find out, similar colors that or hues that I'll be like, now I identify. And then I try to put it into the context of the situation. Go, okay, now I understand. Like, I don't feel that way ever about like my words when I'm talking with someone. It's more like, I don't know. I guess to avoid keeping keeping this topic going. But I think, I don't know, it's a good way to end in some ways because of it's something that you've processed in your past now, but also like to say that you don't even remember the last time. That is what I think is mastering your emotions when you when you've kind of processed them.
There's also one more point that it just came to me. It's like by feeling like I had to dumb my words down, I'm disrespecting the person I'm talking to by like assuming that they won't understand. And that's just disrespectful to them.
Interesting.
To like, yeah, I'll just assume that you need smaller words. Like that's, yeah, like, no. Like, and now, so I'll use whatever word, and like if they don't understand, then here's a chance to, teach them something, or like they might not want to admit that they don't understand or something, but like the whole point of communication is to say something that they understand, and like, yeah.
Well,
not without disrespecting them.
This may be going down another rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
I almost think now when you say that, like specifically that when it comes to mentioning someone else, like it was more about, I didn't want to disrespect someone else, like they are not intelligent enough, makes me think, do you think you're dumb? Like, do you think you're intelligent enough to talk the way you talk?
That's a deep question, actually, because, man, I've had, much insecurity about, like, how smart am I? And I don't know, that's a weird question to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how smart I actually am. So, like, I only realize, like, I often assume that I'm less smart than others.
Yeah.
Especially because I look up to all these experts. And then, like, I compare myself to them, and I always, and being the youngest, and my sisters are, like, really smart, like, really smart people, and my family tends to be, like, pretty intellectual. My uncle's a lawyer and stuff like that, so, like, there's intellect in my family, and then, like, I grew up more in, like, skater, like, fuck school, like, attitude, and so, like, I thought it was not cool to be smart, I guess, for a while, and then when I did want to be smart, I felt like, I wasted all that time trying so hard not to be smart that now I wish I was smarter, and so I'm putting extra effort into, like, studying all the time now, whatever I happen to be interested in, but always assume that I'm not smart until other people tell me, like, that I am.
So something just jumping out at me.
Yeah.
So this idea of how you're looking at yourself, like in my mind, there's book smart and there's street smart, right?
Yeah.
Like the skater vibe is the street smart, right? It's like, and what is street smart? It's experience.
Mm-hmm.
You can only get the street smarts by being on the streets.
Right.
You can only get the skater, experience.
I find that more
skating.
valuable. Street smart's more valuable,
right?
I think.
And I think that's good, though. And I think maybe this is where the struggle is because you're looking at your family and they're all like book smart, but they don't have the experience smart, like the willingness to just go for a trick and fail 10,000 times until you get that feeling when you land it.
Right.
Because for them, it's like, and it's important. I think doctors are a certain type of personality where you need much more of the knowledge rather than the experience, because it's all about diagnosis reduction. You know what I mean? It's like, or what's it called? Deduction of diagnosis, or they go through the list, and you need to have all that knowledge,
Right.
not necessarily, well, experience is nothing, but now I'm going
Theory,
down,
like you need the theory.
but the thing I wanted to connect is like how you're talking about, well, now I value the book smarts, right? It needs to information,
Yeah.
right? And what's also similar, when you said information, I'm thinking about the story of like, give me the information.
Right.
Laughing and playing, that's experience.
Yeah.
I don't value that anymore. In fact, but I do value it, and that's how you come back to understanding. Like, wait, there was a point there that I was really trying to not see, and why am I not trying to see it? Well, because if I see that, then I recognize that I'm not in the book smarts, and I'm actually giving up on book smarts, and these two things can't coexist.
But actually, they need to coexist, and they do always. And that's what I was just, and that's like.
Because I was going to say to you,
duality of reality.
When you initially said, well, yeah, the duality of reality, emotional, logical, emotion, there is a weirdness to
it's
this.
like you need the yin yang of book smarts and street smarts, and the combination of those is what's going to actually be applicable to
But you
life.
don't know that until you kind of also experience both. You have to kind of go through it. And this is when I said to you, like, do you think you're as intelligent as you should be, like the way you're talking to your like other people or to yourself or whatever. And I was like, I was thinking I was going to say right away, it's like you're as intelligent as you need to be.
Right.
For you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's not really anything we can do about that.
No.
But it's also like that thinking starts to, then you start to recognize those things. And I just as what you were talking about this intelligence and what, like the next question is like, well, if intelligence is what you value, what is intelligence, right? And then that's when I heard you describe like your family's in the book smarts, and I can relate to that too.
Yeah.
And I always felt like my brother was like the super book smart, logical guy, and I was like the crazy emotional kid. And so for a large portion of my life, I suppressed that emotion, just went to that logic and But then I learned like I couldn't suppress that anymore. But I'm like, how do these both exist? And that's when now I'm at the point of emotional logic, where it's like they're not actually opposite of each other. They're two sides of the same coin. Like you need enough experience to understand like satire. You need enough experience to like learn logic, and you need enough logic to then go and get experience.
Yeah. No, they definitely complement each other.
They coexist. You know, just as yin and yang, like yin is like stopping, yang is like motion, right? Just as in a punch, just for me to punch someone, there's yin and yang involved in it. There's an extension where I can't physically go any further than this, and it stops. That yin energy, and then I'm pulling back, yang, and then I'm stopped, yin. So it's like they coexist. They're interdependent on each other. And so I don't know, I just wanted to bring up that story because I was like, oh, this sounds very similar in how you were able to come back to going, there was a point there and I was trying to avoid it or something. Like, I don't know how you came to that point. Sounds like you came to that point, she wasn't like, the point is to have fun and laughing.
No.
You were like, oh, that was
No, and
the
again,
point.
it's years later after like pacing my apartment, talking out loud, trying to describe that to the ghost in the room.
Yeah.
And then realizing like, oh, it was not a big deal or whatever. Like I make most breakthroughs personally that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has gone really well. Thank you.
Right on.
Thank you.
Well, we
Hope
got to
this
the
has
deeper
been
layers.
valuable for you. I don't even know if the camera's still on.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. I don't even know if it's still recording. It might have bugged out CPU or something. But that was an episode of Better Out Than In. Both of us kind of got to some deeper layers.
We did, and fuck, man, it's like it's gonna be a journey. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. That's a wrap.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to say that at some point.
We got to get used to it.
I know, it's weird.
Talking about selling yourself.
Yeah. No, but like, man.
Why are we good enough to do even this? Well, we should cut it.
That's the thing. Well, like.
Let's cut it. No, let's cut it. Let's cut it. We'll talk about that after.
Okay. No, but like, I'm getting so much more confident in just being like, doesn't matter if I'm the smartest or like smart enough. It's so weird. Like, just I have knowledge that other people don't, so. And then other people have knowledge that I don't. So then you gotta